I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I recently had the misfortune of watching two pundits arguing about a celebrity tell-all interview. One of the pundits was saying that many of the facts claimed in the interview are contrary to known facts that we can all research ourselves, whereas the other pundit was saying that the facts don't matter. What matters is their personal truth and their lived experience. And I keep hearing these phrases over and over again. People say things like, "This is my lived experience," or "This is my truth." And what I think they mean by that is that their own subjective perspective is more important than objective facts. Now, this is something that philosophers have debated about from time immemorial. Is the truth merely something that we perceive apart from any actual external reality? Or is there a real external reality that we are supposed to perceive and acquire knowledge from and then adhere to? Now, if we set aside the abstractions of the great philosophers, this still has very practical and important implications for us as a society. In the case of these two pundits, they couldn't find any common ground to agree upon, and we suffer this as a society as well as we attempt to live our lives according to a multiplicity of incompatible philosophies. And this is the problem with insisting that your truth or your lived experience is what matters most, because what happens when your lived experience doesn't corroborate someone else's lived experience? How do you find ways to get along and function as a community or as a society? How does a society with millions of different lived experiences and personal truths agree on anything? And don't forget, we do have to agree on a lot of things. Take something like education, for example. Education is the agreed upon facts, the truths that we transmit to successive generations so that they don't have to start from scratch and they can benefit from all of the flourishing and prosperity that we take for granted. If truth is just a matter of subjective preferences, then we have no business educating people in supposedly objective facts. We completely undermine the premise of education in the first place. And sadly, this kind of postmodern subjectivism is rampant in our education system. And it's a very poignant example of the snake eating its own tail. And it has very real negative consequences and implications for current generations that are being formed in this way of thinking. This is why objective reality, objective truth, something that is external to all of us, is so desperately necessary if we're going to function as a society. Because external reality is a neutral plane upon which we can encounter each other and set aside our own selfish perspectives in the pursuit of something that is shared between us. But as soon as we start disregarding external reality or what is objective in favor of our own personal preferences, then we have no way to resolve disputes when we insist on disagreeing with each other. We have no way to appeal to something that is shared between us that we can compare our own perspectives from. And at that point, the only resolution is the assertion of power. And that never ends well. So if we want peace in our time, we have to insist on looking to what is shared between us. We don't all share the same perspective. What we do share is what is external to everyone, which are the logically perceived facts and conclusions about what is true. And it's much better if we find ways to appeal to reason and known truths rather than asserting power to resolve our differences. So I want to offer an analogy that I think we will mostly be able to agree on, and then see if we can apply the logic of that analogy to areas where we might disagree. So imagine if I started thinking of myself as a great and accomplished intellect, and a man who is due the honor of someone who has made such accomplishments. And from this perception of myself, I conclude that it's reasonable to think of myself as a doctor of philosophy. So I start to introduce myself as Dr. Holdsworth in formal settings. I put Dr. Holdsworth on my business cards and on my email signature, and I expect everyone else to start thinking of me, if not explicitly referring to me, as Dr. Holdsworth. And every time someone failed to do so, I would consider it a personal insult or an instance of aggression or bullying. Now, I think we can all agree that the reality is the person who is insisting that everyone adopt their own subjective perspective, that's the person who's doing the bullying here. Because we have standards and systems which are neutral to all of us, which determine whether someone is worthy of that recognition, a recognition that extends beyond their own personal perception, but extends out to those people who are external to that person. So here we have two appeals to truth. The first is my subjective perspective, my truth, my lived experience, which has convinced me that I am due this honor. The other is the agreed upon criterion by which society determines if everyone else should honor me the way that I've chosen to honor myself. And I could look at that and say those standards are irrelevant. The objective facts about my academic accomplishments are also irrelevant and maybe even a little bit oppressive. What matters the most is that I'm able to affirm my self-perception and have everyone else also affirm it for me. And by that, I mean that I expect everyone to reshape their thinking and their perception of what the facts are. I expect them to suppress that perception in favor of my own subjective preference. Any reasonable person would look at that and say, that's oppressive. That's one person insisting that their preference is given all the priority at the expense of everyone else's. And in order to avoid that kind of oppressive imposition, we have to look to, again, what is shared in order to bring harmony. Truth is shared. Objective reality is shared. And if you can agree with that, then I think we need to continue having the difficult conversation about gender identity, because so far this conversation and this debate hasn't really happened in a meaningful way. So far, we've only seen the assertion of power and the bullying that comes with it. The way this is shaping up is that something that is grounded in neutral, objective facts, which is our biology and our sex, which any reasonable person can perceive and assess, has gone up for grabs as something that is to be determined by subjective perception. And not only is this to be determined by subjective perception, which is an extremely unreliable way to arrive at the truth, something that the entire scientific method cries out against, but everyone else is now supposed to conform their subjective perception to the person who is asserting their identity. This is why everyone is tagging their profiles and introducing themselves according to these pronouns, so that we all know what to think about them, not based on objective facts, not based on our rational perception, but merely based on what it is that they assert about themselves and what we are expected to conform our rational understanding to, whether it aligns with that perception or the objective facts or not. Now let's recap here for a second, because remember, what got us down this rabbit hole of self-determination and self-identity was the claim, the premise that what matters the most is subjective perception over objective facts. But if that's true, what right does anyone have to say that my subjective perception, especially about myself, should overrule everyone else's subjective perspective, even about me, and that what I assert to be true is what they now have to adopt in their beliefs and in their speech? The thing about a relationship and a society or a community which is composed of relationships is that we encounter each other with equal dignity. And if we are an egalitarian society, then we are told, and we must insist, that we have equal rights, which means that you have the right to believe what you think is true, and I have the right to believe what I think is true. This is freedom of thought and freedom of speech, which is downstream from thought, which means that nobody has the right to tell other people what to think and say so that it better conforms to what I think and say. The alternative, which is this direction we seem to be headed in, is not equality. It's a tyrannical and oppressive imposition, any way you slice it. Hey, thanks for watching that. If you enjoyed it, then be sure to like and subscribe for more. And if you want to support the making of content like this, then please consider joining my online community, The Reinforcements. It's kind of like Patreon, but instead of being beholden to a big tech company, it's a website I built entirely myself, so there's no risk of us being censored or shut down or anything like that. There are hundreds of people who have already signed up, and our mission is to renew and reinforce the church. So if that's you, then come check it out. As an added bonus for certain tiers, I will also send you a gift box from Glory and Shine, which is a Catholic, family-owned and operated company. They make bath and body products. They're actually their beard balm I'm supporting, or I'm sporting right now. I'm not just a spokesperson, I'm actually a customer. So even if you don't join the Reinforcements, maybe check them out anyways. Glory and Shine, they're an amazing company.